Call a meeting to order, get going. Thank you for being here. For all of those of you who thought that the monarchy was overthrown last week, it was, but the beheading is delayed until today. So that's why I'm here for a few minutes. I do need to acknowledge that we do have a quorum. I'd like to go around the room and have introductions, and let's start down here, if we could. Jeff, turn on your mic.
Jeff Richards, Migratory Bird Production Areas.
Dina Blaze, Salt Lake County.
Joe Havasey, Extractive Industry.
Tim Hawks, Branch Co-op.
Don Leonard representing aquaculture.
Marissa Weinberg, Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Dave Livermore with the Nature Conservancy representing conservation.
Ryan Doherty, Tuella County.
Lee Perry, Box Elder County. Leland Myers, wastewater folks.
Jim Harris, Division of Water Quality.
Madison Weber, the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office.
Craig Miller, Utah Division of Water Resources.
Willie Lanier, Utah Department of Health and Human Services.
Lynn DeFreitas, Friends of Great Salt Lake.
Sam Schratz, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Marco Lozzi, Salt Lake Tribune.
Marcel Shoup, National Audubon Society.
R. Jeffrey Hicks, Utah Airboat Association.
Ari Mason, SWCA Environmental Consultants.
Lily Wetterlin, SWCA Environmental Consultants.
Mark Reynolds, U.S. Magnesium.
Jeff Denblaker, Jacobs.
Laura Vernon, Water Resources.
Anne Neville, the Nature Conservancy.
Nathan Daugs, Cache Water District.
Sherlick Yanis Lampa, Utah Department of Natural Resources.
Ben Starman, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Casey Snider, I'm here.
Heather Dove, Great Salt Lake Audubon.
Dan Stroud, Utah Audubon Council.
Blake Bingham, Water Rights.
Randy Zollinger with Corolla Engineers.
Steve Jones, Hansen Island Luce Engineers.
Did we get everyone? That's great.
This is Tom Ward online, Don.
Oh, Tom, I forgot to notice. Who else do we have online? Jeremy Roberts, Jan Streifel, Rob Dubuque, Steve Erickson, Tim Davis. Did I miss someone? David O'Leary, Heidi Hoven.
Heidi Hoven.
Yeah, Jack Ray.
Jack Ray.
Emily Clark.
Emily, thank you. Anyone else?
Ashley Gajowski.
Matt Berry.
Anyone else? All right. Apologize if I missed someone. Thank you all for participating. I want to give a brief membership report before I step aside. There's been a lot going on. There are several terms that end on June 1st of this year, including the terms by Joe Havasey and Jeff Richards. They have reapplied. Governor Cox has approved their application and sent their names to the Senate to be confirmed, and that confirmation is pending. We have another term that ends on June 1st, Dina Blaze from Salt Lake County. She submitted her application just a few days ago. It's pending governor approval. That is a county appointment, and so the governor usually defers to the county, to the municipality or county that's making the appointments. We have another term that ends on August 15th of this year, Gage Ferrer, and his the status of that is under consideration. In 2 years, June 1, 2026, Dave Livermore's term ends, and he has indicated that he will step down at the end of or this coming June on 2024 let's see, Elizabeth Kitchens has submitted an application for that position, has been approved by the governor, and is pending confirmation. And I should note that Ann Neville, who has served as an alternate to Dave Livermore for so many years, will continue to serve as alternate to Elizabeth. Randy Elliott, Leland Myers, and Tom Ward's terms are also June 1, 2026. Lee Perry is June 1, 2027, and Ryan Doherty is November 16, 2027. My term ends on June 1, 2026. At the last meeting, as those who were here may recall, I resigned from the council effective with the confirmation of Tim Hawks to replace me. He was confirmed a couple of weeks ago. I'll serve as his alternate. With that, the governor decides who chairs this body, and that's part of the appointment process. And we've had a practice, however, because of we've been able to serve addressing issues on a consensus basis. It has been important that we're united and have consensus, and so we have traditionally taken action to ratify and accept the governor's appointment of a chair. You did it for me, and I'd like to entertain a motion to do that with Tim Hawks, to have you support him as vice chair or as chair of the board. Dave Livermore will continue as vice chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask that this body ratify the action of Governor Cox to appoint Tim Hawks as the next chair of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. Need a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Leland, David and Leland. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you for your support, and I'll turn the gavel over to Tim Hawks.
Don, I have, if I may, some thoughts to share about your tenure, and I have a resolution I'd like to read for the group and go into the record. So may I have a couple minutes?
Does it say nice things or bad things?
Yes. Tim? No.
Take it away, Dave.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Don, I wanted to, if everybody can hear me, acknowledge your service in this milestone that is important to this body, and to thank you for all that you've done for Great Salt Lake and the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. To set the stage, I put your place settings a article from 2008, which was in August 2008, Governor Huntsman created the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council through executive order, and some of the original members of that body are still standing, and of course Don being one of them. And then in 2010, as you know, House Bill 343 passed that created the council officially. And so that's a 16-year tenure that Don has been involved, and of course 7 years as chair. And I wanted to also acknowledge Leland, who ably served as chair before Don. So I have a resolution I'd like to read, and a presentation, and a photo op, if we may. So here's the resolution. It's at your place settings. Resolution of thanks honoring Don Leonard for his service to the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. Whereas Don Leonard has had a distinguished career working with the brine shrimp industry, including developing a collaborative approach to brine shrimp harvesting through founding and leading the Great Salt Lake Artemisia, and where Don's commitment to the Great Salt Lake research and collaboration management solutions dates back many years to his support for Governor Huntsman's executive order in 2008, of which he was a founding board member. Whereas Don played a key role in the passage of House Bill 343, and whereas in 2017, Don became chair of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, following in the footsteps of Leland Myers, who ably led GSLAC since its inception. And whereas under Don's leadership, GSLAC has grown to become the leading clearinghouse for information and research about the Great Salt Lake, through sponsoring the publication of papers and reports on lake health, including 12 water strategies for the Great Salt Lake and other studies. Whereas GSLAC continues to play a vital role in funding studies, helping to provide resources to implement HCR 10, and advising key entities such as the Great Salt Lake Watershed Trust. And whereas Don has ably led GSLAC for 7 years with professionalism, insight, skill, and humor, and is always inclusive, fair, and highly knowledgeable about the issues and subjects at hand, and has a knack for running great meetings, which almost always end on time. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meeting this 13th day of March 2024 expresses its deep appreciation and gratitude to Don Leonard for all he has done for this council, the Great Salt Lake, and the state of Utah during his many years of outstanding service and leadership for you. So let's hear it for Don. We have a photo with an inscription. I'll just read this inscription. This is going to be a framed photo once Don chooses which image he wants. We're going to give him a choice. And it says, in appreciation for your service, Don Leonard, with deepest thanks for your dedicated leadership of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. So now we need a little photo op with you and Tim. And Don, I wanted to present you with this gavel that you're going to hand over. So I'll hold a photo. And then, actually, let's just get these two first. So this is the gavel, handing the gavel off. And okay. And then I'll trade you the photo op with, yeah, you hold the gavel, Tim. Okay. There we go. Okay. Let's round of applause again for Don. Okay. Oh, he's good.
Thank you. I'd like to meet that Leonard guy.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so thank you, Dave. This could come in handy, I think, for a variety of reasons. I'm sitting close to Joe here. First of all, thanks for your support, but I did want to add just a few words of thanks to Don. Anybody that knows Don and how he approaches things know just how big the shoes are when you're trying to fill in for Don. And he said to me years ago, he said, Tim, you know, I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I'll always be the most prepared. And I think the reality is in almost any setting that Don is, he is the smartest and the most prepared. And he puts his whole heart and soul into everything that he's involved in. And I'm deeply grateful to him on a personal, I don't know why I'm getting emotional all of a sudden, but on a personal level for his, the way he's been a friend and mentored me personally and professionally, and also express my deep gratitude for all that he's done really for the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council and for the lake. I'm deeply grateful to him for that. So thank you, Don. I'll just mention Ben Stearman, in honor of Don, has brought the Banbury Cross Donuts, and they are over there. So help yourself if you need some sugar to get through the meeting. And Lynn is always bringing cookies. So thank you, Lynn, as well. But anyway, thanks everybody for being here today. And we're going to continue with the agenda with Representative Casey Snider. Casey, let me just say on a personal level, Casey and I go way back. We were colleagues at Trout Unlimited. I don't know how long ago, Casey. It feels like a long, long time ago. We served in the state legislature together, and Casey is not only a great guy, but he's deeply committed to the lake and its conservation, and he's really been the workhorse now in the legislature in terms of moving Great Salt Lake related legislation. And so we're going to turn it over to Casey to give us a little bit of a rundown on what went down this last session. Casey, take it away. Yeah, thank you. Is this mic work okay? Do I need to hold it up maybe so you can hear? No, thank you. I'll be totally honest. I don't really want to talk about the legislature. I have a little bit of PTSD. I think Joe probably has a little bit of PTSD this session, but we're going to do it anyway. We're going to be strong. My therapist says that it's important to talk about our problems. So the legislature is my problem. We're going to talk about it. First and foremost, Tim mentioned some things that were kind and probably unwarranted, but I am the third string quarterback at the legislature. There used to be guys like Tim Hawks in the legislature, and there used to be guys in the legislature like Joel Ferry, and then there was one.
and I am the one. And so you're dealing with that. All the talent and the brains have left the building, and I am the lone man dealing with Great Salt Lake. Hopefully we'll find some other sucker to start picking some of this up. But as we kind of talk about this session, there's really a couple of bills and then more on the appropriations side. I think if I were to describe this session, I would say it was very much nuts and bolts, belts and suspenders type session. We had a couple of big bills, obviously, that I'll talk about, but really from my vantage point, what we did was make investments in the things that have already been done prior. Bills that were established by my predecessors or things that the legislatures kind of move forward through. So maybe before I get into the legislation side, just to give folks a sense on where we were on the dollar side in making investments at Great Salt Lake, because I suspect some of these you haven't heard about. The commissioner's office received $10 million. We'll talk about how that's going to be bifurcated, but there's $10 million obviously to accomplish the roles of his office. There was about $200,000 put towards split season leasing, which would allow water that is in that fourth crop with alfalfa or otherwise sort of implement that split season program that we already have in place. Money available to move that forward. As I'm looking just down the list, we put $1 million ongoing and $1 million one time in putting the infrastructure in place to better measure the water inflows going into the lake. This is going through the state engineer's office. There's some additional money also for her office that is on the data management side. So we're doing infrastructure, long-term investments in staff, and then data management so we can understand more in real time where water is in the lake and when it is there. One of the things that we invested in, and this is partially coming out of that money that I set aside that we talked about being set aside for the commissioner's office, is there is an additional $5 million going to this Ogden Canyon pipeline restoration for a total of $10 million, $5 million coming out of the commissioner's office. That $10 million will be the capstone of a $100 million project. And what it will be required because of the state's investment in that project is that 1,200 acre feet or 1,200 CFS, 1,200 CFS annually will be delivered into Willard Spur in the summertime. So that's a 15-year lease. We do a lot of projects. The state does supplement local projects from time to time. This sort of is the first where we've said if we're going to make an investment in the Great Salt Lake watershed, we expect a return, and their saved water from that project will end up in Willard Spur during the summertime when it's most needed. We pulled some money out of the Sovereign Lands Restricted account in a few tranches, I would say. So $5 million of that is going to be going to wetland project work and hopefully using the trust's process for ranking and prioritization and their brain power to ensure that wetland projects are done on the Great Salt Lake that are going to reinforce the lake. There's an additional, and this isn't Great Salt Lake specific necessarily, but there's $1 million for Utah Lake, or am I saying that right, Brian? Ben, $1 million for Utah Lake, $1 million for Great Salt Lake, and then $500,000 that's going to Phragmites specifically. And then $500,000 ongoing to pay for staff to do some of those projects. That was a lot of work for many in this room, plus some work from a Representative Katie Hall, who many of you may know. She really stepped up in a big way this year to help on some of that stuff. So that's really the big funding items. I don't have that number in front of me in aggregate, but you can see that we are making investments, continued investments in Great Salt Lake, and those are just the few of the things that we're proud of. On the legislative side, a little bit quieter this session. Scott Sandel ran SB 18, which really clarified some of the saved water provisions in bills that we've already run. Senator Bramble had a bill that does a study on Utah Lake that hopefully bears some fruit as to help clean up that water body. Probably the one that caught the most attention, at least early on in the session, was HB 453, which was the bill dealing with how we're going to navigate some of the complexities on the mineral extraction side on the Great Salt Lake as we have these diminishing flows. That bill has really two parts. I'll go over it kind of quickly, but one is just the regulatory side, how we ensure minerals aren't wasted, how we make sure the state's getting a fair return, how companies integrate with the state. That's really half the bill. And then the other half deals with water and empowers the state engineer to make some drastic decisions as things get worse and worse in this system if they do. It also allowed mineral companies to opt into voluntary agreements with the state and really provide some certainty and for them and for the state. Joe's obviously here with Compass Minerals. I'm really, really grateful for what they have done. That bill started a little tense, but ended, I think, in a very positive way with all parties being on board. And Compass Minerals really did step up at the end of that in a way that I think is going to be of value to the state. And maybe you can ask him later at that. But basically, we will have voluntary agreements with nearly every extraction company in the basin, which is, again, going to set up the framework for what happens to the lake when we hit critical triggers, whether it's salinity or water level or what have you. So anyway, that's kind of the quick and dirty on this. I'd really rather have this be more free form. If there's any questions about what's happened or that type of thing, I'd really rather have that discussion here.
Okay, thanks, Representative. Any questions for Representative Snider? Lynn DeFreitas, let's get you a mic.
I don't remember the number of the bill, but it has to do with infrastructure that Water Resources has created a study on. Was it HB 430 or 380 or 066 or I don't know. You don't know?
You say 666?
There's a few infrastructure bills. Who ran the bill? Do you recall? Hopefully.
Sure.
It is.
Is it 280? Was it Mike? 280 bill? Okay.
280,
yeah. So that bill had so much ambition, so many dreams, was drafted so wonderfully, and then it ran into all of the process. It basically, where that came from is a series of realities. One, an audit out of the legislature, indicating that we're really not planning very well between the state and local governments and local entities. It also was meant to address sort of the long-term funding needs and the prioritization of funding going forward. Really, where it ended up at the end of it is set aside about $5 million. I think that's right. It might be 2.5. Budget cuts. Anyway, Lee remembers the budget at the last minute gets creative. There's a block of money to set aside a new water infrastructure fund that will allow water projects to be applied for based on their need and planning. It also begins the process of prioritization for water projects. So it's a planning process as we move forward, and it starts that addressing the terms of the audit. The two other provisions of the bill, which were maybe overambitious, are now relegated to study status, with us sort of moving forward to address those issues long term. The first is how we integrate existing pots of money. There's money in everything from drinking water to dam safety to whatever. Those funds are all paying for water projects, but they're not necessarily all talking to each other. So the study will figure out a better way to integrate those conversations and move forward as part of a prioritized planning process. The third thing it will do is create a study that looks at how we are going to fund water projects and water infrastructure long term. There is a reality. It is coming. Hear me now, believe me later. But right now, roads and transportation and housing seem to be the bottlenecks in this state. Water will be that issue at some point, and we're quickly approaching that. If we don't have a way to fund for those types of infrastructure projects as we do the others, we're going to be in a bad place as a state. So the study will look at how we could pay for water projects long-term statewide, how fees and funding could be collected long-term statewide, and how those fees and funds would be distributed. So it's really setting up a multi-year process. I think the first studies here hit in a couple of years, and then so in the next 3 to 5 years, all these questions will be answered, and I'm sure great policy will be enacted by probably somebody else. But that is the ambition of that bill. So, do you want me just, yeah, go ahead, R. No, I just didn't know if Tim wanted to handle the question.
Casey's used to being yelled at. So no.
Especially this year.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'll try to make this coherent as possible. So we have Commissioner Steed with the Commission on the Great Salt Lake to try to wrangle all the departments and get water to the lake and whatnot, we're hoping. And now SB 11 creates a new commission to work on water. And I'm wondering if those two goals, which may not always align, how do we resolve that if the new commission recommends, say, we want to take this water for development? Commissioner Steed says, oh, wait a minute, we need certain water for the lake. How are you going to resolve that?
So so SB 11, are you talking about the 280 bill that I just talked about?
No,
or-
SB 11 created that commission that's going to be looking to water manager, a little commission to try to get water agent. So what I'm wondering if what they recommend doesn't align with Commissioner Steed's goals to protect the lake, how do we resolve that, and what do you see happening?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the generational water project bill that the president ran and the speaker ran. Okay, because SB 11 deals with sex and kidnap offenders.
211.
211. I thought you said
Sorry.
11.
In my mind,
you and I might
I
be
know
talking
exactly
different
what I'm
words.
saying.
Okay, perfect. No, I actually think that's it's a good question and an easy answer. So SB 11 is outward looking. It is 211, right? We're not talking about sex offenders again. Thank you, good catch. 211 is outward facing. It is saying what exists outside that can help us resolve water issues inside of the state. So that is going to be conversations about with our sister states. It's possibly pipelines, possibly trades, a whole host of options that we would have available. That is their job. And they are to then come back with recommendations. The commissioner doesn't necessarily integrate with that other than if there's excess water that could be available for Great Salt Lake. And his role is still to be sort of jefe grande as it relates to Great Salt Lake among the various entities and agencies. So I actually see them aligning very well. I think we have to have a conversation where we look forward and look in other places, trans-basin wide, to have conversations about water. We've had to do that in the past. Anyone that thinks that we can't have that conversation, if you live in the Wasatch Front, you should probably just turn off your tap now, because a large portion of your water south of here is coming from the Colorado, and that's Central Utah project. And they had the foresight at that point in time to use the state's allotment and allocation to bring it here to sustain growth and to sustain the state. That even at a Great Salt Lake level, I know you guys probably understand this better than most, water from CUP has been some of the most consistent flows into the Great Salt Lake down the Jordan. So this really is maybe more a replication of that process long-term than anything within the borders of the state now. So does that answer your question? And if they don't align, how do you? I don't see them not aligning, because 211 would be new water. So I don't see them being in conflict. So
Maybe time for one more quick question. Is any of the questions from anybody for Representative Snider?
Okay.
If not, thank you.
Yeah,
Casey.
maybe I'll go grab a donut and see what kind of fun you guys are having the rest of the day.
Yeah, please do. Thank you, Casey. Okay, we're going to move to the next item on our agenda, which is an update from the Office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. Tim Davis, who I know is trying to juggle a lot of things and be a lot of places today, is joining us online. Tim, the time is yours. You're there?
Yeah, Tim, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there in person. Commissioner Steed is out sick, so I would normally be there, but I crawled my way up to Snowbird this morning to give a talk up here and to the Nature Conservancy. And so, but I'm happy I can zoom in. I appreciated Casey's update on legislation. I'm mostly going to focus this morning on talking about the work the Commissioner's Office is doing on implementing the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan that was adopted at the end of last year and went public on January 15th. So there were four main goal objectives within the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan. Those were bringing people together, making decisions based upon the best available science, or developing new science if we need it, getting water to the lake, and protecting water quality and air quality. And so a number of implementation actions that we are moving on right now under the bringing people together objective is we are setting up working with the different divisions in the universities and federal partners like the USGS. We are setting up a dust forum for May 16th, where we will be talking about Great Salt Lake dust from a scientific perspective and a management perspective. What science is currently being developed, what science is needed, and what funding's out there to help make sure that we've got the science and the management tools that we need when it comes to dust in the future. When it comes to the best available science, we will be coordinating and are coordinating with Forestry, Fire, and State Land and the tech team on funding that they will be providing for studies. We're also working with the Division of Water Resources on the Great Salt Lake Basin integrated plan studies, as well as modeling. And I look forward to interacting with the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council as the council is making investments in research as well. I know that one study that the Commissioner's Office will be funding is working with UGS and the U on gathering better data related to the amount of groundwater that is getting into the Great Salt Lake. And then on the objective for getting more water to the lake, there are a number of items that we'll be moving forward with. One of those is we committed in the strategic plan to developing a more detailed 30-year plan for getting water to the lake. That will include identifying how much we're currently conserving through whether it's agricultural optimization, and this will be working with all the divisions as well through municipal industrial conservation, how much we need to conserve on average over the next 30 years to get the lake to a healthy level and maintain it there. And then what is the delta between what we're currently conserving, getting to the lake, and how much we need, like I said, on average each year for the next 30 years. And we will also be developing a contingency plan to take steps to help ensure that the lake does not go below 4190, really the floor that was set in the strategic plan, and is also in Casey's, the bill that Casey brought up, House Bill 453. And then we will be working with we'll be working on that last piece is working on protecting air and water quality. We will also be working with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, the Division of Water Rights, and the Division of Water Quality as they move forward with the three different implementation pieces of House Bill 453. So, Tim, I'll stop there, Mr. Chair, and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. I should have done a better job introducing Tim to the group. Tim, is it 4 months you've been in the saddle?
I think it's 4 years.
Feels like 4
Mr.
years.
Chair.
It's
Yeah,
like
so-
legislative years.
Yes. No, yeah, it's 4 months.
I just wanted to say, and we're really lucky to have Tim be the deputy commissioner for the Great Salt Lake. In Montana, he was the equivalent of the Montana state engineer, so he's got extensive experience in water rights. He was, before this, he's with Division of Drinking Water, I believe, so he's got a lot of experience on the water quantity and quality side of things, and we're really lucky to have him occupy the position he does. So thanks, Tim. Maybe time for just one question. Any questions for a question? Anybody have a question for Tim Davis? If not, Tim, we're going to excuse you. We know you got a lot on your agenda. Safe travels. Hopefully you can get some skiing in while you're up there giving a presentation, but somehow I suspect that's not in the cards.
No, I'm driving to Kanab from here to give another talk. So
There you go.
Tim, as I just want to let you know, we'll plan to, if it works for you as chair, we'd like to give an update at all the advisory council meetings going forward, and just make it to make sure that we're coordinating well with you and the whole council.
That's great, Commissioner. We're planning on that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, with that, we're going to move to the next item on our agenda. That's Nate Daugs is here to present on regional economic benefits of the Bear River. This is a study that I think spearheaded by Cache Water Conservancy District and GSLAC. The council provided a little gap funding for this out of last year's appropriation to help get it done, and we've asked Nate to come and present the findings from that study. So Nate, we'll turn the time over to you and see how things, hopefully, I know you're trying to get a presentation up there, so I'm stalling for time.
The share button is not live.
Maybe Lynn could tell us a joke, because she always has one available.
You asked for it, Leland. You're going to get it, I think. Actually, here we go. We got it.
Okay, everyone can see that. Thank you for letting me come down. I'm going to give you a little background on this study first. Cache Water District, probably a little over 3 years ago, as we went to many meetings, we would always see the Great Salt Lake report that was done, I think 2012, on the economic benefit of the Great Salt Lake. And at that time in politics, I guess it was, we felt like we needed a similar study to show our side of the story, really to be against that report. And I think Tim thought the same thing. When I came to you guys a year and a half ago, a little over a year ago, to ask to help fund this study, his response was, why would we help pay for something that you're going to use against us, right? And originally that was really the idea behind it with agriculture, particularly in the Bear River Basin. We felt like we were being targeted unfairly because the Bear is the biggest contributor flow-wise to the Great Salt Lake, and probably the least over-allocated of any of the tributaries. So we thought, well, we got to have this study. But as time went by and we entered a couple years of drought, and a number of other things started, we realized we need that partnership with it, right? To bring varied partners together to do this study, but to also figure out how we come up with a resilient water supply for the Bear River Basin, which a big portion of that is the Great Salt Lake. And so just the study area, 10 counties, 3 states. And often as we look for solutions for the Great Salt Lake, we talk about Utah. But Idaho is a huge part of the potential solutions for water resiliency in the Bear River Basin. And this study really brought that out. But we brought a lot of partners together. And some of these don't always see eye to eye. Again, GSLAC was one of them that often doesn't work together with soil conservation districts and in those ag groups because they can compete for things. We had a number of partners in Idaho that helped with the study. They didn't help fund it because of the way grants line up and different things, but we did cross the border to start to bring Idaho in on the conversation because we feel with Commissioner Steed's report of needing 470,000 acre feet additional water to the Great Salt Lake every year, the only way that can happen without totally doing away with agriculture in Utah is to get Idaho involved, because Utah's portion of the Bear River is less than Idaho's. And so we've got to figure out how to cross that line. We think this study is the first step in that. For time's sake, I'll go through some of this pretty quick. But really, we wanted to understand what are we producing in the Bear River Basin, and what would we have to give up or compensate for to move water around the basin? And this study starts to get us there. And you'll see this last bullet point, 39% of the benefits of the Great Salt Lake come from the Bear River inflow. And that number changes every year. So you guys had a study done in 2017. That number was 33%. This is from 2021, the Great Salt Lake Strike Team's latest update. If we do 2023, it's going to change, right, every year. And so that, don't focus on the 39%, but other than direct precipitation, the Bear River is the biggest contributor to the Great Salt Lake. So we see that critical integration of what we're doing upstream and conservation projects we can do, and how that ties pretty significantly to the Great Salt Lake. So the biggest money producer in the basin, of course, is agriculture. 630,000 irrigated acres between the three states. This slide breaks that up. But what do we often hear in the public, right? Alfalfa is the evil water user of water in the state, and we ship it all out of the country. In the Bear River Basin, alfalfa is only 35% of the crops grown in the basin. And that's split between the three states. And so it's not the biggest crop, right? We have a lot of other crops that are grown in the basin. It's a very diverse crop, but you'll see in a second. Well, so this shows you where that is. So Wyoming, really not very much agriculture out of the Bear River system in Wyoming. Idaho and Utah, the vast majority of that, split almost 50-50 in there. Idaho's a little bit more, but that gives you an idea of where that cropland is and the different types of irrigation, which we're now working on, right? Upgrading those types of irrigation to be more efficient, and hopefully figure out how we can continue to produce this amount of crop, but reduce depletion. It's going to be a very tricky process, right? To come up with 470,000 acre feet of additional conserved water based on depletion is no small feat. As you'll see, I've got another slide in a minute here that'll show that. But here's kind of the production. So alfalfa was only 35% of the crop grown, but over 50% of the income that comes from that crop. So total crops in the basin is $510 million annually. And that changes, again, this is a snapshot in time. That changes very fast. So alfalfa prices this last year are almost at historic lows. If we would have done this 2 years ago, the alfalfa number would have almost tripled from what it was in this study. And so that changes very quick with these crops, as it probably does with the brine industry and mineral industry, right? Those numbers are a snapshot in time. Cattle, calves, milk, another big industry in our counties up there that we get. And so we get the total agriculture contribution to the basin of $860 million annually. And that's just the base product, right? That's not the jobs that are created. That'll come a little later in the study. And we do that by diverting between 1.3 and 2.6 million acre feet of water out of the Bear River system. Quite a bit of water. And when we look at that, we think there's a lot of water to come up with for that 470,000 acre feet, but that's diverted water. And depletion, again, a study that is going to continue, but from past studies that have been done, depletion is about 62% of that. And so if we take that number and then we look at Utah's portion of that, it pretty much mean if we wanted to get it just from Utah, we would have no agriculture in Cache or Box Elder County come up with that 470,000 acre feet. And so I think this gives us that first step to say, how do we reach across county lines, right? First, we have to figure out how to get that shepherding to work in Utah and to get that fallowing program to work in Utah. And then we've got to figure out how to cross state lines with that program to make it feasible, because it's huge for these rural counties to have agriculture there. If we take that away, the ripple effect of that is billions, not just the 860 million. So agriculture by far the biggest sector in this study. This next slide, we can go pretty quick, but it's just to show that in the Bear River Basin, almost 100% of our culinary water comes from wells and springs, right? We're not treating river water like Weber Basin and sending it out to communities. And so really the city's pumping water out of wells, going through their treatment plants and into the rivers and to the Great Salt Lake for the most part is an extra water boost but it shows that we rely solely on groundwater in the basin to supply our culinary needs. Hydro generation. So Pacificor has a number of generation plants on the Bear River system throughout the basin, and that equates to roughly $18.2 million of power generation. And you can see how that varies. 2011, 2017, you're going to see another spike on 2023, right? Those wet years, that really increases. But for the most part, it's pretty flat on that generation. Recreation is pretty big in the basin. Bear Lake did a recreational economic benefit study a couple years ago. We used some of that information, but there's a lot of recreation sites in the basin up there. And if we look at that, expenditures they look at throughout the basin. Let me get this right slide here. Might have went too far. But another 150 million that comes from recreation in the basin there. Cultural and heritage. Some of these, for me, it's hard to grasp my mind of how they do the studies. That's why we hired a smart company to do this study to figure all that out. But another 27 million that comes from that, from people coming from a number of cultural sites that are in the basin. And then the non-market values, we have 48 million from these here. And then the Great Salt Lake part of it that we put in there. So the Bear River, again, the 39%, and we just took that directly from the 2012 study with those benefits on the lake, primarily brine shrimp and the mineral industry, and 39% of those to come out of the Great Salt Lake. And then the Bear River provides 11,000 jobs in the basin, which is another $403 million annually. That's full and part-time jobs. A lot of those based around agriculture and the recreational industry, primarily where those are. Again, these are primary jobs, not the secondary jobs that are created from inside that basin. And so it gives us a grand total. I was trying to hurry because I was told my time got cut short because Casey was coming. So I tried to trim this down a little bit. I agree. So a grand total of $1.9 billion generated annually from the Bear River in that basin. And if I think you all, at least on the commission, have seen the full study. I assume Marissa sent it out. I know some of you reviewed it throughout the process, but it talks about 70% of the ag products are exported. And we want to make sure that that's clear, that's exported outside those 10 counties, right? So it's new money coming into those counties, but the majority of that is exported to neighboring counties and states. The exports out of the country vary quite a bit year to year, right? China's not even buying alfalfa right now from the United States. They're getting it from Australia. And so that varies so much, but the exports that we looked at, they're exported outside that 10 county area. And because that's the way they generate new money to the counties, but it's not exported outside of the country by any means. We produce a lot of milk. We can't drink all that milk inside those 10 counties. But we import a lot of ag products too to feed all those dairy cows. And so there's a lot of numbers in here. This is, because of the amount of funding we had, pretty high level to get that number. If you want to drill down to see where all those commodities go, it takes a lot. I mean, to track where every brine shrimp cyst goes, right? It goes all over the world. And so some of these products are the same, they go all over, but it's a huge number, at least we felt, right? $1.9 billion. That's a big number. And half of that roughly with jobs coming from agriculture. And agriculture is who we're going to have to work with to find that extra water to get to the Great Salt Lake, because the amount the cities use, at least in the Bear River Basin, is so minimal that any conservation they do there really just reduces their outflow from the sewer lagoons. Because if they're pumping it and going through their house, it increases. So really we should be requesting longer showers in the basin, because that water all gets to the Great Salt Lake out of the Bear River Basin. We don't have retreatment for the most part other than one small city. But that's the quick of it. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you haven't seen the full report, we'll make sure that gets sent out so you can all review that and reach out with any questions from that. But we do appreciate your input on the study as it went through, with some of the reviews that were done, and also your help funding that study to give us that diversity in some of those partnerships that we think are critical going forward to come up with these solutions.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for being here. I particularly appreciate the comments about partnership. I think that the temptation in water, right, is to default to a zero-sum game precisely because it does have value wherever it is. And I've long felt that the only way you solve something as complex as Great Salt Lake is an all hands on deck. Everybody's sort of working together, including these other states. So I appreciate you bringing that perspective in. I think we have time for a couple questions. So Dave, go ahead.
Thanks so much for that really great report. And as Tim said, the cross-state analysis is so important. My question has to do with politics in Idaho. We've been so blessed. I think back in 2008 when we first gathered, we never dreamed that people like Tim and Casey and Joel would sponsor legislation to really transform water use and management in Utah. I have to pinch myself to remember how far we've come. Is there any corresponding interest amongst Idaho legislators to address depletion issues and other similar things that could help, frankly, the lake, but agriculture even in Idaho?
I would say probably not. And if there is, it's very little. I think the one thing we have on our side with the Bear River is that it's governed by a compact, right? A tri-state compact. And so we already have the Bear River Commission that we could work with to start that conversation in Idaho with those legislators. If we needed to change water law in Idaho to make some of that work, I think we could start with that group that is already working across state lines. Because yeah, it's going to take, I think, a lot of work to get that happening. Because if you go to Idaho, for the most part, they're not concerned with the Great Salt Lake, right? They're far enough removed from it. They're not worried about dust going up there. They're not worried about those things. They're not seeing the benefits of the economy that it produces here for the local area. And so we have to figure out, how do we make it attractive to them to be part of the solution? Because when we're talking about that quantity of water, which on some years, if you look at the depletion amount, we're maybe 800,000 acre feet is depleted in the whole Bear River Basin. And not to say these other basins aren't going to be part of the solution with that 470, but even if we come up with half of that, right, that's a huge portion of what's being used. And so we've got to figure out how to work with those agriculture producers to make it attractive all the way up the system. Because if it's only on the Utah side, it's going to be a tough sell. And I mean, Representative Snider, they got $270,000 this year to do a pilot project for that fallowing. You're probably going to need to add a few more zeros behind that to make it ever work when you look at these numbers, right? You're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars to come up with 470,000 acre feet. If we do it with a split season lease, there's other ways to do it, but it's not going to be an easy feat.
Thanks, Nathan. Other questions from either from the council? Leland, go ahead.
Yeah, if I'm looking at that graph correctly, and if I had better eyes, I could just look at it better. Of the 1.9 million you talk about, there is included in that, as I see it, values for is it Great Salt Lake minerals and aquaculture too?
Yes.
Because they're in the area of the basin.
Because, and we took that based on the percentage of inflow to the lake. Yeah. And so if you took the Bear River's inflow away, and that's the way it was calculated. So there is, yeah, they're in the basin, and the Great Salt Lake is, connected to the Bear River in a pretty integral way. So that's why we counted those. We took 39% of the 2012 study.
Any questions from public? I was tempted to ask Nate what the economic value is of the ice cream sold at Aggie Ice Cream. I think my family's made a fair bit of contributions to the local economy via that.
I ate some last night. That left over from my birthday a little while ago. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being here, Nathan. Appreciate the good work, and look forward to continuing to partner and work with you as we try to come up with the solutions that really work for everybody all around.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, moving to our next item on the agenda. It's another report on a study. This is coming out of HB 429, which did some really important kind of setting the stage for long-term planning and study. But this is specifically dealing with stormwater, and we have Steve Jones from Hansen, Allen, and Luce to give us an update on this report as it relates to stormwater and the Great Salt Lake. So, Steve, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, so Hansen, Allen, Luce, and Limnotech was selected to help the state answer a question that came out of the House Bill 429. I believe that was 2 years ago. And this is actually the whole language dealing with this study, but highlighted that we're supposed to study the impact of low impact development, best management practices associated with post-construction retention stormwater permit requirements on the water budget of the Great Salt Lake. And then we were supposed to study that and write a report. We worked with Laura Vernon from the Division of Water Resources, and then Jim Harris from the Division of Water Quality. So it was kind of a shared study, and they worked very well together for us to give us direction on answering this question. LID, or low impact development, is an engineering methodology to use green infrastructure to treat the stormwater off of development. And so we did a pretty thorough literature review on the subject matter, and then we used surface water modeling and groundwater modeling together to kind of answer this question. And we came up with basically 3 scenarios that we looked at to identify the differences between these 3 scenarios. And so the first scenario was the pre-development condition. This is what happens to stormwater, the pre-development condition. And interestingly, most of the precipitation that falls on the pre-developed landscape actually evaporates. And so the storms are small, so it doesn't allow for the water to seep into the groundwater. It doesn't allow for runoff because it evaporates before it happens. So it takes a pretty significant storm or snow runoff, a melt runoff, to actually get to the Great Salt Lake. And I have a little, you can barely see the little pie chart down there, but interestingly, and I know these percentages are being refined and more study is being done, but 31% of the water that enters the Great Salt Lake actually just falls from the sky right onto the lake. That's a significant amount of water. And we've talked about the Bear River and the other rivers that contribute around 66% of the water, most of that large storm runoff and snow melt. And then about 3%, although I think that's being updated probably upwards, it gets to the Great Salt Lake through the groundwater. So that's the pre-development condition, which is actually contributes the least water to the Great Salt Lake. We also studied the development condition without LID, and then the development condition with LID, because that was part of the question. So interestingly, yes, and that this is what was predicted before the study even began. Development without LID obviously contributes more water to the Great Salt Lake. In fact, if we just pave everything, that would bring the most water to the Great Salt Lake. Except for it produces, very expensive conveyance and very dirty water. So that's probably not acceptable. And so that's the case with the development without LID. It does produce more water, but it produces dirty water that needs to be taken care of. And so the LID actually is a very efficient way to clean that water and actually send more water to the Great Salt Lake more than the pre-development condition. So let me just go through these. These are little diagrams that kind of represent the water in these 3 different scenarios. So this, again, the first one, the pre-development condition, if we just take 100 sample acres of pre-development land, we have the source water, which is the precipitation and snow, et cetera, that falls on the land. And then what we want to follow is this purple water, because the purple at the end is what gets to the Great Salt Lake. So out of 100 acres, our modeling showed that these are very rough numbers, but 18 acre feet per year actually gets to the Great Salt Lake, predominantly almost entirely through groundwater recharge. And so if we take the development without LID, on 100 acres. Again, we get that water running off the land unimpeded, and so it does improve the amount of water that gets to the Great Salt Lake. Although there's a treatment of that dirty water that has to be treated. If it's not treated on site, it has to be treated somewhere else before it reaches the natural water bodies. And so that does produce a lot more water, 71 acre feet a year to the Great Salt Lake, compared to the final scenario, which is development with LID. So again, it produces much more water than the natural condition, but less water than the non-LID scenario. But the difference between those, and this is a little table trying to estimate the whole area and what is the total number. And again, these numbers have caveats. This is a fairly high level study, but essentially those two red numbers are the difference in the water that reaches the Great Salt Lake. The difference is actually a very small amount when you consider the total supply to the Great Salt Lake. It's much less than 1%, to put it in perspective. Yes, so the end result is yes. Without LID, more water would get to the Great Salt Lake, but we have a huge problem in that it has water quality issues that still need to be taken care of. And LID is a very efficient way to treat it at the source with green and natural infrastructure, which works very well. And so that is basically this is kind of the result of our study, benefits and drawbacks. Basically more water without LID, but it would require some sort of treatment somewhere off-site, with LID being more water than the natural condition, less than without LID, but it is a very good solution as far as treating the water and still getting water to the Great Salt Lake. So with that is my presentation, and I'm ready for questions.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate the presentation. I've got a couple questions, and we'll see if other folks do as well. One is, obviously, for purposes of the study, you have to treat LID as sort of a concept. It's rather monolithic. To my mind, as I see LID in practice, it ranges from kind of the pictures that you showed, which may be hyper efficient at getting water into groundwater, to very inefficient systems that basically wind up ponding a lot of water. Standing water, that water then evaporates. And of course, that's water that could be in the lake where it has ecologic value, but it's often just left in a, for lack of a better word, a grass bowl where it does no good to anybody. So one is, how do you deal with that sort of complexity? And then the second one is, and I know this is also kind of a complicated thing, is how do you account for the fact that the lake itself is an amazing treater of water quality, right? Particularly when it comes to the nutrient side. The other things get a little more complicated. But when you talk about nutrients, the lake is great. It can handle way more nutrients than get into the lake already. So any accounting for those kind of variables in the study or in a future study that you'd like to see?
There was a lot, like I said, a lot of literature review. So obviously there's the EPA is, if you read all the language in here, it's actually in the bill, talks about we probably do need to pay attention to EPA requirements, which require the state to help treat the water and not pollute the natural waters of the state. So no, we didn't get into too much detail into that, but there is, that has to be, I guess, taken care of somehow, whether that's LID or some other solution. Yes, probably maybe Great Salt Lake could handle it, but there are a lot of natural water bodies in between. Even if we threw out regulation or threw out EPA, which is we need to pay attention to that. But even still, just looking at the science, there is a problem of just cleaning up the parking lots and throwing it right into the natural water bodies next to it.
And how about that sort of system design question? Is anything on that, like in a future study? I mean, again, I think for the purpose of this, you sort of say, hey, this is LID, but anything thought about best practices? Or the developers, of course, hate this. And what you see is they'll send pictures and say, do you see what this is doing? This is not doing, and it's costing me all this money, and it's not accomplishing it's hurting the lake. That's kind
Yeah.
of what the vibe I
There's
get.
probably some room for study or improvement on that side of things. Again, that wasn't totally part of our scope of work. There is literature review on it. But yes, obviously there's better design and poorer design, and there's maintenance that's required to keep these facilities up and running properly. So yes, I agree. That's probably where some effort should be spent to optimize maybe LID rather than maybe getting rid of it completely.
Thanks, Steve. Other questions from the council? Let's go council first. Yeah, Dave, go ahead. Hey, Tom, let's go Dave Livermore, and then we'll grab you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
Just quickly, not being a hydrologist, I understand, of course, you can measure rainfall, you can measure flows from rivers, you can measure stormwater coming out of a ditch. How do you actually measure seeps and groundwater getting into the lake? I mean, it's not as though there's like 20 springs that are point source and you can put a measurement. It's more of this kind of seepage, basically. How do you measure that?
So all of it very complex and tricky. And I was the project manager, making sure it was getting done, but I'm not the expert on every single one of these items that we focused on. But we used modeling and modeling methodology to try to help us answer those questions. So again, surface water modeling and then also groundwater modeling, because this is both a surface water question, runoff question, and also because LID gets more water into the ground, it's also a ground movement, how it gets to the Great Salt Lake question. And so we used modeling to help us answer those questions. It's not 100% perfect, but it gives us, again, this is an idea of the impact of LID.
Thanks, Steve. Tom, you had a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Steve, question on, so at Sandy City, and Steve knows we work there, and most of you do, that I work there. We had a developer say that they shouldn't have any sort of detention because it will get to the Great Salt Lake. And I'm asking for confirmation that this is not a developer saying don't require a stormwater detention, or, that trying to convey it automatically to the lake. I think my view on that is, if you want to make giant channels going through cities, taking all the water for all the flood flow, fine, but that's going to be many, many more millions, if not billions. Is that, can you just affirm that response? Yeah. What would a develop? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so he's absolutely correct. And that's what I stated. You pave everything and you get it to the Great Salt Lake as fast as possible. That's the best way to get water to the Great Salt Lake. But if you don't detain it, then you're talking about very large and expensive conveyance. But even more than that, if you send the dirty water through big pipes down to the Great Salt Lake, you've got to treat it somewhere. You've got to take care of that. And the more you concentrate it, the bigger the amount of water that comes headed towards the natural system. It's got to be treated before it enters the natural system, and that can get many, many more times expensive as you regionalize that. It's much cheaper to take care of it at the source. And again, LID is a very good way of doing that.
And Steve, Tim, if you'll allow a follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Having worked on some studies that show how much water goes when you get it into the ground, that it gets to like the Jordan River, at least in Salt Lake County. Do members account for that what you store at a basin in some city along the bench? There you go. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So yes, LID. That's the difference with the non-LID versus LID. Non-LID, you get a lot of more surface water and it comes faster, but there's the water quality problem. But yes, LID is a great way of getting the water into the ground. So it does benefit recharging the ground water. The disadvantage, I guess, for the Great Salt Lake is that it is slower to get to the Great Salt Lake that way through the ground versus surface. But again, it does get to the Great Salt Lake and it does improve the aquifer along the way.
that delay creates, we have a high year like this year or last year, we get in the water, in the groundwater, and it shows up as a consistent flow as accretions. I think the Jordan River has anywhere from 60 to 150,000 acre feet of accretions through Salt Lake County alone, that you have guaranteed water flowing through
Yes.
groundwater seepage into those. Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. So it slows it down, but it actually benefits that once it's in the ground, headed toward the Great Salt Lake, then you're kind of buffered from the drought, if that makes sense, because it just keeps going when the drought occurs. So you get, yes, this attenuating effect, which that's why I'm excited about this year. I think we're just barely going to see the water from the great year we had 2 years ago, and in this year that's basically looking like normal. We've got a lot of reservoirs that's full. We got to make room for the new water to come, and we've got this. We're just barely seeing the groundwater from wells coming up. That started, end of last year, basically, and so that's all headed toward the Great Salt Lake, and that's all very good news for the Great Salt Lake.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Tom. Sorry, go ahead. Tina has a
A
question.
question that refers back to something you said at the very beginning about this monolithic understanding of LID, right? And sort of beginning to drill down a little bit within what you've discussed sort of in urban and exurban, suburban situations. What is the most efficient LID approach? Is there a study that is going to be done? Are we just thinking about that? Is it underway? Where are we on that? Because I think that's a critical element to understand how that might impact what Tom's thinking of, which is what do you do at a municipal level with regard to land use
Yes.
to sort of make that happen?
Yeah, and so so my firm isn't doing anything, and I don't know anything that's out there. I know Division of Water Quality is always working on that. That's their domain. And all the cities are working on that. They're the ones that impose these LID requirements on the developers, and they're always fine tuning, either using national data that is best management practices, or even getting together within the state and starting to understand best management practices. But again, I think that's a great place to look at. Now that we've kind of answered the question, can we make LID even more impactful and better at cleaning the water, but also getting the water into the ground or to Great Salt Lake?
Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Any questions from the public?
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Luce. Leland, I didn't see you. Absolutely.
More of a comment. I think your study actually shows that the impact of the LID is really a very small number.
Yes.
I mean,
Good for you to point that out.
Without stating it, I think that's what you're saying here. Is it's
Less
really
than
a small
1%.
number in terms of the impact to the lake. I agree with what you said that perhaps it has a direct benefit insofar that by increasing the groundwater, we'll see more actual runoff. One would hope that this year is like 2011, which was 2011 was after a wet year that replenished the groundwater in the reservoirs, and we had a 5-foot rise in the Great Salt Lake, and we're going to hope that this year's the same.
Yep. Yes, I agree. But yes, very good point. Yes, LID benefits the Great Salt Lake, but there's probably other things to focus on as far as the Great Salt Lake, and there's water quality and developers and development in general. The LID is probably a more important discussion in that realm, not necessarily Great Salt Lake, because this is a very small impact.
In my world and realm, the proposed reuse projects that are on the books right now being proposed are substantially greater for an impact to the Great Salt Lake than this ever would be.
Certainly in terms of depletions, right, or potential depletions, right, Leland? Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Yes, thank you.
It's traditional at Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meetings open up for public comment. So I want to open it up for public comment. We have anyone who wants to do public comment? Looks like a couple. Let's go Lynn first.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to remind everyone that Friends of Great Salt Lake is hosting its 2024 Great Salt Lake Issues Forum, May 8th, 9th, and 10th. The website is inviting registration, so you go and be there in May. Secondly, I'd like to mention that annually, or not annually, but at our biennial Great Salt Lake Issues Forums, we recognize someone or an entity that has done amazing, thoughtful work on behalf of the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. And this year, we are recognizing Don Leonard as the friend of the lake. As an opportunity maybe for the advisory council to consider future presentations, how about if we have a presentation on Great Salt Lake shoreline preservation? There's a lot of impacts going on with the landscape around the lake, and there are efforts afoot to work to address ways in which we can protect wetlands, adjacent uplands, and the hydrology of the lake. So maybe something like that shared with the advisory council would be useful. And also, Doug, I really appreciated your economic report on the Bear River. And I'm wondering if with that as kind of a appetizer, if perhaps the council would entertain more subsequent presentations that focus on the Bear River. For example, the key component of inflows from the Bear into Great Salt Lake that affect circulation within the South Arm and salinity concentrations therein. Also, the Bear River Massacre Site, but also Rocky Mountain Power storage in reservoirs. And what does that look like? What does it mean? Things like that, in addition to the economic contribution that provides. So those were just some ideas that I wanted to mention.
Excellent. If you could hand it to Willie there, Willie.
Thank you, Lynn. Hi, everybody. I'm Willie Lanier with the Utah Department of Health and Human Services. Really appreciated the presentations today. I learned a lot. One was that we should take longer showers and I think that most people think the opposite. And I have it depends on where you live. Okay, so and that point too is very important. Second thing that I learned is that stormwater doesn't contribute very much to the lake. Frankly, I think most people think it does. That's what they see. They're like, oh, look at all this water. It's going in. That's great. Look at that. It's going to the lake. Well, I guess not. And the third point was something that Tim mentioned, is this idea of an all hands on deck approach. So to kind of combine some of those together, I've said things like this before, but I think it also, as preface to this, Representative Snider talked about policy. And a lot of our efforts have been focused on policy. And in my mind too, I've thought, oh, if we could just have the right policies. And I do think that we're getting closer, and we've got some great policies, and we're working those. And I have thought in the past, if we could just have the right policies, then everything will be okay. I think in the spectrum of impact, policy is pretty far to the right, if you will, to the impactful. But I think there's something even more impactful. I've come to appreciate this and believe that farther toward the impact spectrum, and that is cultural change. I think cultural change is even more impactful than policy change. So how do we instill this all hands on deck approach idea? How do we get every person in northern Utah to think, and maybe in other states even too, to think, what can I do to save the lake? And back to the shower thing and the storm drain, I think most people think I need to take shorter showers and I need to dump water down the storm drain. Like those would be, but that's maybe not what it is. And so I think what we need is some sort of public education or cultural change campaign to get everybody to think, what can I do to save the lake, and educate them on this is what you can do. So one big thing that I have in my brain is billboards on I-15 saying this is the goal of lake water level and this is where we're at. What can you do to help the lake go here to find out more? And then coupled with a public education campaign of like this, let's talk about showers, let's talk about storm drain, let's talk about secondary water, and really trying to instill a sense of this, we're all in this together. So I just wanted to say that.
Marcel, go ahead. Thanks, Willie.
Hi, thank you very much. Again, another really substantive Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meeting. And Don, thank you for all your leadership for all these years. Really very much appreciated. I just wanted to let everyone know that the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, which is led by the Nature Conservancy and National Audubon Society, has released a 5-year strategy. It's available on our website. And I won't go into it here. I think Lynn's going to give me a chance to talk to you all about it at the Great Salt Lake Issues Forum. But if you're interested, please visit gslwatertrust.org. Thanks, or catch me afterwards.
Thanks, Marcel. Any other comments from the public?
And I got a quick note.
Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
Yesterday, I was preparing a presentation for somebody, and I looked at the elevation of the south arm and was quite pleased to see that it's achieved its peak from last year, and here on March 13th. So very hopeful. We see a pretty good gain from here with runoff coming. So just thought that was noteworthy.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. And it's really been those of us geeks that are always on those sites. It's been nice to see, and the North Arm coming back really nicely as well. So we're set up really good thanks to that last water year. Leland, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to let the gentleman know he can take as long showers if he takes out 80% of what grass he has around his house or.
Well put.
And no park strips with any grass in the
touche, Leland.
mile of where you live.
I will say it is kind of interesting just because, again, there was a big article about the Rivers Council and the rain barrel thing, and I love that, but I always sort of say, rain barrels don't save water, right? What saves water is how you use water and how you consume water. So it's just kind of interesting because there's a lot of people just don't realize, sometimes connect A to B to C. So thank you. All right, we're going to close the public comment. We'll come back to the council. Let me just make just a reminder for future meetings. Our next scheduled meeting, we're skipping May because of the issues forum. Thank you, Lynn. Is July 10th. That's scheduled to be here. And basically same bat time, same bat channel. Our other meeting dates are September 11th and November 13th. So the last agenda item is just to ask from the council, we had some suggestions from the public, suggestions from the council in terms of follow-up items or issues that you'd like to hear at future meetings. Just throw it open for just a minute to members of the council. Do you have any suggestions or things you'd like to see follow-up done on for future meetings? Seeing none, I think we're ready for a final motion. Okay, we got a Leland motion to adjourn. All in favor? A second here from Dave Livermore. Or Dave, you have something before we adjourn?
Before we adjourn, I just wanted to reflect with the changes afoot and Don stepping down and so forth about the growth of interest in the lake and also the other entities that are being created, particularly the commissioner's office. And frankly, I was worried at one point. I mean, love the attention that there'd be a lot of overlap and duplication of interest in the lake. But I'm pleased that the commissioner is going to be reporting and part of GSLAC. I think what's very unique about this group, and I hope people remember this, is the composition of the council. Every interest is represented, local government, of course, great feedback from the public, and that's kind of the magic sauce. The other entities are just as important and doing great work, but nowhere else is there a forum where these different views can come together. I think that's been the power. I hope that will continue.
Thank you, Dave. It's a great perspective, and I think it's testament to the staying power of this organization that it's continued to go. And I can remember just 7 years ago when I started coming to Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meetings, and we could fit in a very small room. Let's just put it that way. So it's good to see everybody. Thank you so much, members of the council and members of the public, for coming and participating today. And for those that were giving presentations, really appreciate your engagement. I'll go ahead and place that motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Be sure to get a donut or a cookie on your way out. Do your part, not just for the lake, but for sugar manufacturers.